Well, welcome everyone. I am thrilled to have you here today. It's a webinar on the principles for ethical online fundraising platforms, and we have a couple guests that I'll introduce in just a moment. But just as a matter of context setting, first of all, I'm Renee Bird-Lewis. I'm the CEO of the Gwinnett Coalition, and as many of you know, a top concern for U.S. nonprofits is financial stability, sustainability, and revenue uncertainty. And according to data from the Urban Institute, over half of all nonprofit leaders, 55%, rank overall financial health as their biggest organizational concern. There's a lot of anxiety, and it's driven by shrinking individual donations, cuts to government grants, and rising operating expenses due to inflation. While finances remain the foundational stressor, organizations are dealing with a severe triple threat landscape, struggling under the combined weight of funding cuts, historic surge in community demand, and unprecedented employee burnout. And with declining revenues and grants being squeezed, organizations face severe downstream competition. They are competitive for fewer dollars, and nearly 60% of nonprofit leaders report that securing foundation grants has grown significantly harder. Many are turning to online fundraising platforms to secure additional funding. But there are some ethical challenges related to these online platforms and how they operate. And in order to better protect nonprofit organizations and donors, the National Council of Nonprofits is working to provide some guardrails by establishing principles for ethical online fundraising. And we are a member. Gwinnett Coalition is a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. We endorsed these principles along with 51 other states and regional associations. So turning to our guest speakers today, I am going to find the right slide to advance, essentially. We're going to move right into introducing Sarah Sadian, who she serves as NCN's Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Campaigns. And Sarah joined NCN just last year after serving as SVP of Public Policy and Field Organizing for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Sarah has more than 15 years of experience with national campaigns and successfully advancing federal policies on Capitol Hill. She's a lawyer. She remains a member of the State Bar of the in Virginia, and is a graduate of the University of Virginia. You'll hear from her in just a moment. And then Mike Levengood, also joining us today, a little closer to home, a resident, longtime resident of Gwinnett County, is a former partner at McKenna Long and Aldridge, and now operates a general practice law firm serving Gwinnett County and the Metro Atlanta region. Mike is a former adjunct faculty member at his alma mater, the University of Georgia School of Law. And if we could hear you, I'm sure many of you are going, woof, woof, I think is the thing that they say. Many of you may know Mike is a dedicated community leader in Gwinnett County. Many years he's served on various boards, including Northside Hospital, formerly Gwinnett Health System, the Chamber of Commerce, Leadership Gwinnett Foundation, Gwinnett Parks Foundation, and the Gwinnett County Public Schools Foundation. So you're going to hear from Mike after Sarah gives us some background and information on the principles document. Then we're going to go into some of the legal requirements that Georgia has for fundraising, and then Q&A at the end. I would invite you to, as we go along, if you have questions for Sarah and then for Mike, to put them in the Q&A. We will be pulling questions from there, and we'll take, if there are some after Sarah's segment, we'll go right into those. Same thing with Mike. And then if you've got combined questions at the end, it'll be just open dialogue at that point. So thank you, Sarah and Mike, for joining us. And Mike, sorry, I'm not very good at doing these, I'll pull yours up in a minute. Okay, Sarah, you're live and it's your turn.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about ethical ways that we can raise money online. As Renee said, I'm Sarah Sadian. I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the National Council of Nonprofits. We are the largest network of nonprofits in North America. We work primarily through our state and regional associations, including Gwinnett Coalition. So we're so glad to be here today. And through those relationships, we represent about 40,000 organizations nationwide. So we're really happy to be with you and to work with you throughout the year. So as Renee mentioned, millions of Americans are donating to and volunteering with charitable nonprofits, making a difference in their communities. And many people are turning to online fundraising platforms to give. But we've noticed that many of these platforms are operating without the consent of nonprofits and in other ways that are actually counter to the needs that nonprofits have. So in the US, there are hundreds of online fundraising platforms that are collecting donations for nonprofits without their knowledge and consent, sometimes in violation of state or local laws, and generating millions of dollars of fees and tips in the process. Some of these platforms are using incorrect or outdated information that misrepresents nonprofits' brand and mission. Others are charging hidden fees, or they set excessive default tips for donors. And too often, these platforms are inserting themselves between charities and donors, which makes it harder for nonprofits to build the long-term relationships that they need with their supporters. So last year, this issue came to a head when GoFundMe created 1.4 million nonprofit pages without the knowledge and consent of charitable organizations. And the response was immediate and clear. Nonprofits were very upset that GoFundMe created these pages, and they were demanding that they have the power to decide when and how to engage with online fundraising platforms. In response, NCN and many of our state associations weighed in directly with GoFundMe to share these concerns. And to their credit, they did take down those pages very quickly. But we soon realized that the problem was bigger than just one platform. We needed a national framework to ensure that all online fundraising platforms were operating in a way that respects both donors and nonprofits. So we got to work and we formed a working group with nonprofit leaders from across the country, and we worked together to try to find a path forward. And together we created a shared set of principles for ethical online fundraising platforms to help protect charitable nonprofits and the very generous donors who support them. Next slide, please. So we have four major principles for how platforms can operate. One is around consent, transparency, partnership, and accountability. And I'll talk a little bit about what each of those means to us. So the first one is consent. Next slide. We strongly believe that nonprofits must have the power and agency to decide for themselves about when and how. Some of my language didn't come up. Oh, well, I'll fill you guys in on the gaps. Must have the power and agency to decide for themselves about how they want to engage with online fundraising platforms before those platforms solicit or collect donations on their behalf. For us, consent is at the core of these principles because nonprofits can't advance their missions without public trust. That trust is built every day through having a presence in the community and being accountable to the public. But when platforms engage in unethical behavior, they compromise these vital relationships when they, for example, give inaccurate information to donors or give donors a bad experience online. And nonprofits aren't the only ones who are demanding the right to consent. Restaurants have reached an agreement with meal delivery platforms. Hotels have reached an agreement with major booking platforms. And nonprofits, we think, deserve the same protections and respect. Next slide. So our second principle is around transparency. We want to make sure that donors have the power and information that they need to decide whether they want to make a donation through an online fundraising platform or not. We want information to be provided clearly, not hidden behind in small text or in ways that they can't see. We want to make sure platforms are disclosing all fees, charges, and tips so donors know from the front end exactly how much of their donation is going to make it to the nonprofit. We want to make it clear whether the tips that are offered, sometimes these platforms set default tips, but it's unclear to the donor, are those tips going to the nonprofit itself or to support the platform? And we want to make sure that default tips are never set as the default, that there's an option for donors about whether they want to cover those or processing fees, and that they have clear decision-making over all elements. Donors need to know how much of their donation is reaching nonprofits, and whether the platform has the power to redirect those donations to another organization. Many platforms are using DAFs to distribute funds, which means that they can decide that your donation goes to a different organization if they choose. And we also think that donors should be able to designate a second organization if they can't reach the first one. Donors should be able to designate a second organization or get a full refund for the donation that they made. Next slide. And Renee, I see so many of my words are missing. I'm wondering if there's any way to fill them in, but if not, we'll roll with it. And I think you're muted. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So the third principle is around around partnership. We want to make sure that online fundraising platforms are recognizing nonprofits as valued equal partners. And when we spoke with nonprofits around the country, we heard very clearly about what they mean by that partnership. They want to make sure that funds are transferred to nonprofits within 30 days, not several months later. They want to make sure that platforms aren't using paid SEO or search engine optimization so that the platform's website comes up before even the nonprofit's website does. We want to enable long-term relationships with donors, so ensuring that online platforms are sharing with nonprofits information that they need to cultivate those relationships. Implementation has to be safe, easy, and user-friendly. We heard time and again that many nonprofits found it very difficult to take their names and organizations off the website. Sometimes they were asked for really personal information like banking information just to remove themselves. And that really isn't the way it should be. Nonprofits should be able to easily and flexibly use platforms if they want to, but also take their names off if they don't. And then finally, we want to end unethical practices like requiring nonprofits to waive their rights just to remove their page from a platform. That's something we saw time and again, especially after the GoFundMe circumstance, where nonprofits were required to check boxes, agree to terms and conditions, waive away their rights just to remove their name from a website that they never consented to being on in the first place. Next slide. And then finally, our fourth principle is around accountability, not just to the nonprofits, but to donors and the public as well. It is important that online fundraising platforms comply with existing state laws, that they support measures to hold bad actors accountable, and that they're reporting and providing greater transparency over how many donations are being received by nonprofits through their platforms, how much money has been redirected or refunded, how much money is actually reaching nonprofits, how many fees are they collecting, and other relevant information that the public needs to know. We'll share with you afterwards a link to our principles, but I encourage you to please check them out. As Renee mentioned, these principles have been endorsed, next slide, please, by 52 state and regional associations. We'll go one more. There we go. 52 state or regional associations of nonprofits across the country with a combined membership of about 40,000 organizations. Next slide. There's too many to fit all on one slide, so we had to have multiple. And it's also been endorsed by 9 fundraising platforms as well, or 8 fundraising platforms, to show that this is not about nonprofits not wanting to see platforms be successful. We want platforms to exist. We want nonprofits to have the choice about whether to engage, but we also want to make sure that they're working for nonprofits and that nonprofits have the choice about whether or not they're engaged with these organizations. So there's a couple of ways that you can take action to support our principles. We'll encourage you and we'll send you a link so that you can endorse these principles and give us feedback on other places where you think we should be engaged. But we also want to encourage you to share these principles with other nonprofits in your community, share it on social media, and be part of a movement to encourage online fundraising platforms to engage and operate ethically, and for them themselves to implement these practices into their work. So with that, I will turn it back to Renee.
Great. And if there are any questions for Sarah, thank you very much. That was great. I'm sorry that some of that content didn't make it in the beginning. I think we're on track now. I really appreciate that context and the document. Of course, it's going to be available to you. It'll come to you after this. It'll be a follow-up email. So there are no questions in the Q&A section. So if something occurs to you, please do that. And now I think we're going to be turning it over to Mike. Becky's taking the controls, and there he is, front and center. And so, Mike, thank you for joining us and for giving us some additional information. If we're operating in Georgia, there are some requirements, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. Mike, I cannot hear you. In fact, I don't hear anybody.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm Mike Livingood. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with each of you, and I appreciate Renee including me, and I enjoyed working with Sarah as she pulled together the materials for this. This is relevant to each of you as a not-for-profit in Georgia because you have independent obligations as not-for-profits that you need to be aware of, and that to the extent these fundraising platforms operate without your authority or consent, there are things that you should be able to do and that you need to be able to do in order to comply with your responsibilities under Georgia law. And so my talk is just basically what are the Georgia registration requirements regarding organizations that solicit or accept donations from residents of Georgia. All right, next slide. So the Georgia Secretary of State has two divisions. You're most familiar with the Corporations Division. That's where a not-for-profit corporation to organize files its articles of incorporation, and where thereafter, on an annual basis, it files an annual registration statement and pays an annual fee of $35 to be in good standing. A lot of people say, well, I file with the Secretary of State, so I've done all I'm required to do. And that's fine as far as it goes with the Corporations Division. However, there's another division called the Charities Division. And the Charities Division has a requirement that charities must register unless they are exempt. And I talked with Nora at the Charities Division yesterday, and she just reminded me, don't think about whether you're a charity under 501c3. Don't think about whether you're a not-for-profit that does good work. Focus on what do you do that may require you to file with the Charities Division. So we're going to talk about that quickly. Next slide. Title 43, Chapter 17, and the rules and regulations of the state of Georgia is where you can find something called the Georgia Charitable Solicitations Act of 1988 as amended. It has some definitions. Solicitation means the request or acceptance, directly or indirectly, of money, credit, property, financial assistance, or any other thing of value to be used for any charitable purpose. That's writ large, very broad. And then charitable organization means any benevolent, philanthropic, patriotic, or such associated group or person who solicits or obtains contributions from the general public, any part of which is used for charitable purposes. However, it does not include religious organizations as defined in a subpart of that code section. So churches and related entities are not considered charitable or are exempt from regulation under this particular statute. Right? Next slide. So what are the registration requirements? Well, charitable organizations or individuals that solicit or accept charitable contributions from any person located in this state, or who solicit or accept charitable contributions while in this state from any person, or who solicit or accept charitable contributions on behalf of a charitable organization located in this state, shall file a registration statement with the Georgia Secretary of State unless they are exempt from the registration requirements. If you're not exempt, then you should submit a completed Form C-100 application or universal registration statement along with an initial filing fee of $35. Those registrations are good for 2 calendar years and should be renewed every 24 months, paying a renewal fee of $20 with the submission of the renewal form before the expiration date. So if you file it in 2026, then by the end of 2027, before December 31st, 2027, you need to file another registration state or a renewal. Okay, next slide. So who's exempt? That's, of course, where the first thing you look. If you're a not-for-profit who's qualified under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, you say, okay, well, so I'm a charity as recognized by the Internal Revenue Service. I ought to be exempt from this particular registration requirement. And that is not the case, nor does not agree with that interpretation. Those organizations that are exempt include educational institutions, and those organizations operated, supervised, or controlled by or in connection with a nonprofit educational institution, provided they are qualified under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. But that's limited to educational institutions. Religious organizations we just talked about. Professional associations, fraternal and social organizations, named individuals. There's a $25,000 exemption. Volunteer and rescue, hunters, fishermen, and target shooters, and political organizations. Political organizations are separately regulated. Used to be by the Secretary of State. I think it's now by the Ethics Department. Our friends in the General Assembly have made sure that our volunteer and rescue folks and our hunters, fishermen, and target shooters are exempt if they are 501c3 organizations. But the point here is simply having a 501c3 is not sufficient unless you meet one of these other tests. And that's all described in the statute. Okay, next slide. All right, what's the $25,000 exemption, you ask me? It is any charitable organization which does not have an agreement with a paid solicitor and whose total revenue from contributions has been less than $25,000 for both the immediately preceding and current calendar years. Okay, so there's a de minimis rule. If you're below 25, then you're okay. You don't have to register. The problem is if you get to $24,999 in the middle of the year, you were supposed to have registered before you started that solicitation. And so you can get yourself in a bit of a box. But nevertheless, $25,000 is the de minimis exception. Next page. So then, one of the other requirements is that if you don't have a written agreement with a paid solicitor, well, so what is a paid solicitor? That's defined as a person other than a commercial co-venturer who for compensation performs for a charitable organization any service in connection with which contributions are or will be solicited within or from this state. It will also include any fundraising counsel who at any time has custody of contributions from a solicitation. However, the good news for each of you who are executive directors of your not-for-profits, a bona fide officer, employee, or volunteer of a charitable organization is not considered to be a paid solicitor. A solicitor agent is defined as any person other than a charitable organization, a paid solicitor, or a commercial co-venturer who or which solicits charitable contributions for compensation. So the key here is if you are going to the public and getting paid for doing that, and you don't otherwise qualify, you need to register with the Secretary of State Charities Division. Fundraising counsel is any person other than a paid solicitor required to register under this chapter who plans, advises, consults, or prepares material from solicitation of charitable contributions within, into, or from this state, and who does not either solicit such contribution or employs, engages, directs, or supervises any compensation person to solicit such contributions, or who has custody or control of such contributions. It does not include professionals like lawyers and accountants who regularly advise their clients about compliance with this statute. Paid solicitors are required to file a Form S-100 and all attachments and pay an initial registration fee of $250 and to renew their registrations before December 31st of each calendar year by paying a renewal fee of $100 and, if applicable, a current bond and financial statement. Bonds are $10,000. And then solicitor agents are required to file a Form SA-1 and pay an initial fee of $50 and an annual renewal fee of $50. All right, so those are the actors, if you will. Do I have another page? Nope. Okay, so the key here that is important for you to keep in mind is it is unlawful for any person in connection with the execution of any charitable solicitation or charitable sales promotion, directly or indirectly, to utilize any representation that implies that the contribution is for or on behalf of a charitable organization, or to utilize any emblem, device, or printed matter belonging to or associated with a charitable organization without first being authorized in writing to do so by the charitable organization. So these platforms that unilaterally elected to insert themselves between you and your donors broke the law, and you have a recourse with both the Georgia Secretary of State by filing a complaint and with the Attorney General for the state of Georgia, which monitors charities as well and provides the legal services to the Secretary of State. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I apologize for the detail, but that sort of gives you the overview of how charities are regulated by the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Mike. And it's a lot of detail, but everything's in the fine print, right? And so if you're not a lawyer, of course, it makes it difficult. There is a question in the chat, and then I actually have a couple, and I'm hoping people will maybe submit something. But first, there was a $25,000 threshold. Does that include grants? How are grants treated in this fundraising view?
So I think that that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to the question. I suspect Nora's view is grants would include in the revenue number, and you should retain counsel to advise you about that and to communicate with the Secretary of State Charities Division to get an answer to that question.
Okay.
I think you have a good argument that it is really focused on protecting the public and isn't really related to the receipt of grants from other governmental agencies and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's also, we're performing work, right? Essentially, for there are deliverables associated with it typically, and requirements for reporting, so it may be treated, I would hope, a little differently.
Right.
Consistent with that, if you have an actor, a solicitor that you're working with, is the nonprofit sort of on the line to ensure that they, as the actor, have filed their appropriate state documents or whatever's required, or that's on them? Not on you?
I would put that on the ethical best practices. You would want to require that they comply with Georgia law.
Okay. All right. So Sarah, I had a couple things that came to mind as you were sharing. How do we know, like, if we are receiving, well, I guess I know how we would know, because it would come through our interface for dollars coming into the coalition, probably where that money is coming from, but you don't necessarily know if have a page somewhere out there in the universe of fundraising platforms. Is that correct? And if yes, then what does one do? Where do we start?
Yeah, that's the real challenge here. Is there are, from what I understand, about 300 of these websites. And now with AI, it's very easy for anyone really to create a new website by using, data scraping to get information about your organization and put it on their website. That's part of the challenge. A lot of nonprofits don't know that they're on these sites, and they just don't have the capacity to monitor every single platform and keep track of what their relationship is. Was a new one created? How much money was raised? So that's one huge challenge we see. The other is that sometimes you don't know until and unless you see a check in the mail from one of these platforms. And, of course, money is always welcome when nonprofits are trying to make every dollar work.
Yeah.
But it's hard to make those dollars into bigger dollars if you don't necessarily know who are the donors behind those donations and how you can build relationships with them. How much money did they provide for you over what period of time? What do you know about them? How can you report back to them about the great work that you're doing with those resources that they generously provided? So it's a very challenging situation. For nonprofits, they can go out and search for their organization, but I think that'll be really hard to do and hard to keep up with, which is why we need a national framework of how platforms are acting ethically. I think nonprofits should be able to decide which of these platforms they want to engage with and which of them they don't want to have any relationship whatsoever, so that they can meet their needs without overwhelming their capacity.
So what should someone do if they find out that they have a page on the X tech platform?
Yeah.
And yeah, what would be the recommended next steps? And I heard Mike say, the state of they're in violation if we've not given,
Yeah.
right?
The first thing you can do is try to take your organization off those websites. Sometimes that's a cumbersome process and they might require a lot of information, but you can definitely go that route. But we also think it's helpful for you to be weighing in with your state attorney general and your state charity officers to let them know that you're experiencing this platform that's been operating without your consent. I think we're starting to hear from AGs that are more and more aware of this issue and concerned, not only concerned on behalf of nonprofits who are having to chase down all these websites and deal with them, but also concerned about what the experience is for donors who might be misled into thinking that there's a relationship there between the donor, between the nonprofit and the platform. So there's certainly consumer protection issues and nonprofit issues that your AG and state charitable officers need to know about. So I'd encourage you to report that and to let us know at NCN.
Okay.
And I can in Georgia, if you go to the Georgia Secretary of State website under the charities division, there is a link where you can ask if a particular organization is registered, and then among the things you can select are as a charitable organization, as a solicitor, or as a solicitor agent. So if you do that research and you don't find X platform listed, then I think the next call should be to there's a place where you can click a box to make a complaint. But I think before you make the complaint, I think I'd call the number. You'll get to Nora and be more than happy to talk with you about what your options are. She's probably going to tell you to hire a lawyer, but at least she'll know what's going on. And let me also mention that I talked with the Deputy Attorney General for the state of Georgia, who is monitoring this stuff. And so far as he knows, there's no pending litigation against any of these platforms by the Georgia Attorney General. But, I think, and Sarah filled us in, that the Attorney General in Alaska sued 6 platforms back in March of this year. And I believe that those matters of litigation, which are pending in the state courts in Anchorage, Alaska, are in the process of there are settlement discussions going on with those platform providers. And the allegations against them by the Attorney General are basically what we have in our, it's unlawful for you to do this without the consent in writing in advance from the charity, and therefore, you should cease and desist and pay damages.
Yeah. So something to think about, depending on how many nonprofits, might be concerned about this in Georgia. So, Sarah, if you could, this is a question that came in, if you could encourage every nonprofit board, I guess, although boards often are not involved in these types of operational things, but if there's one question to ask before selecting a fundraising platform, what would it be?
That's a great question. I think the question I would ask is to know more about the business model that the platform relies on, because that tells you a lot about how they treat nonprofits and how they treat their donors. So some platforms, for example, are nonprofits themselves, and they operate without charging any fees to the nonprofits and without charging fees to the donors. Maybe they rely exclusively on tips from donors who choose to support their platform. But there are other platforms that are for profit that are charging processing fees, tips. Other partners are charging fees to process the dollars. It's really important that you know how they are approaching their work, how they make their money, and what that means for how they engage nonprofits and donors.
Very good. Okay, question. Do nonprofits as an organization supposed to register as a charity, or is it individuals working for the organization that solicit money? Does that make sense, Mike?
So the charitable organization that receives more than $25,000 in a calendar year from charitable solicitations is required to register. So the executive director of the organization would do that. If there are paid individuals, not employees of the organization, but third parties who are out there who are meeting with you and they're going to run your fundraiser, to the extent they're either solicitor counsel or solicitor agents or solicitors, you need to make sure they are aware of the requirements and that they comply with Georgia law by registering if they need to do so.
So what I'm hearing you say is if I'm a development professional hired by and paid by Gwinnett Coalition, then the organization registers and I'm covered as an individual. If I'm a development professional who is a consultant, a contractor, and doing work from the outside in, then I would need to be covered.
I think that's right. So if you're employed by, as opposed to being a 1099 consultant, I think you want to be careful.
Right.
In this latter case, to file your own registration.
Very good. So action items, kind of the takeaways, Sarah and Mike, I think we're clear. I feel really good about, we all know we need to go check our status at the Secretary of State's office, the charitable division. We should be friends with Nora if we are not registered and are actively fundraising. And maybe even if we're engaging with a consultant, still have the conversation to ensure that we are compliant from a state perspective. Is that about right? Those action items, Mike?
I would agree on the Georgia side. And to follow up on your question about what should you do when you're talking with one of these platforms, I mean, in fairness, these platforms may be a great source of revenue for you. So I'm not saying this should be you go to war with them. Instead, it should be you want them to respect you and they need to have your consent. And maybe as part of the negotiation whereby you consider their proposal, you ask them for references of other not-for-profits that use them.
Yeah.
And then talk to those people to see what their experience has been with them about doing what they said they would do in their agreement.
And Sarah, you had a slide that had some platforms who had been in conversation with NCN and your team and that they are supportive of the principles. Can we assume that they might be the ones that we should research because we know that they already are transparent and accountable and meet some of the requirements that the principles outline?
I think it's a great place to start. And some of them don't necessarily adhere to every single principle that we have laid out, but they want to move in that direction. There's a commitment there to learning more and to being engaged on this issue and improving their platform so that they better meet the needs of nonprofits. I would definitely recommend checking those sources out to see if they work for you. And some of them work on lots of different ways and have lots of different models. So there's options that you have available to you depending on what works best for you.
And then what would be your ask of us and nonprofits in Georgia as it relates to this advancing the conversation and supporting a standardized set of principles?
Well, the first thing you can do is check out the principles. We'll share a link with you. I welcome your feedback. We want to hear from nonprofits across the country to make sure that this is resonating with you about what you think is needed. If there's something that's missing or something that needs to be added, let us know and we can make those adjustments. And then if you feel comfortable, we would love your endorsement. The more organizations that we have on board of supporting these principles, the easier it is for us to make the case for platforms for why they should voluntarily choose to move in this direction and to help meet the needs of what nonprofits are telling them are important to them. And then lastly, I'd say it's so important for folks to stay connected to Gwinnett Coalition and therefore connected to the National Council of Nonprofits. What we've found is that when nonprofits are speaking with one voice, when we're unified, we can be incredibly successful. And my hope is that we can all work together to really change this online environment, to give nonprofits greater control over their names, their missions, their logos, their identities, and to make sure that online platforms are really respecting that as and nonprofits as valued partners. And I think we can do that if we stay connected, if we have a unified voice and we make our voices heard.
And at this time of the year, we have contested races for the Georgia Attorney General and for the Georgia Secretary of State. So if you're getting an inquiry about an opportunity to support that candidate by putting up a yard sign or paying money, you might want to have a conversation about what's their position on this issue and are they supportive of not-for-profits and ethical fundraising platforms.
That's a great point, Mike. Tis the season, and tis the fundraising season too, because we'll be at the end of the year pretty soon, and that's the prime time for nonprofits to close out the year strong.
Absolutely.
All right. If there are no more questions for these two, I think we're going to move into kind of wrapping things up. We really would appreciate you completing a survey to let us know how we did in terms of meeting the expectations for today and delivering you some valuable information that you will find helpful in the future and that you can act on. So there's the QR code. Please take your phone right now and shoot a picture of it and have that up. It doesn't take very long, and it's certainly helps us shape the content and the type of information that we're bringing to you in the future. And then speaking of the future, we have a couple of events that are in the near term. We are offering nonprofits through a partnership with a city council member, but long table consultant Linnea Miller, the Peace Index. So for nonprofits and their teams who are working very hard and often experiencing the stresses of all things in the nonprofit sector, this is a great professional development opportunity to come and have an assessment. We'll send you more information about this in the follow-up email, but it is August 25th, and it's going to be held at the Lawrenceville Arts Theater. And then also, we are offering part 2 of an AI tool workshop. This is going to be offered at the UGA Gwinnett campus by a UGA professor. And so we did part 1, and he was in the class, and he came to me afterward and said, I would love to pick up and take this to the next level. And so there'll be some real practical implications and tools that you will actually come and work on something for your organization on that date, and that's September 23rd. And finally, we have moved, many of you probably know, from a monthly kind of all call, which we started during the pandemic, and we would call nonprofits together every month and that was virtual, to not doing those anymore. And we are excited to be launching our quarterly meetings that will occur 4 times a year. And we'll be focused on some topics that we hope you will find of interest and that you will join us. It will be over the lunch hour, 11:30 to 2 p.m. The first one is October 6th. We do not have registration information yet for you, but please save the date. And it's going to be actually held at the Gwinnett Hospital. Actually, it's not. It's Northside Gwinnett's Resource Center. Mike actively serves on that board now. So I believe that's right. The Northside Gwinnett Resource Center, which is right adjacent to Northside Gwinnett's hospital location. So we're excited to be in partnership with Northside on that and look forward to you marking your calendars and maybe joining us. So we're ending a little early, but I think probably that will be fine. Your plates are full, I expect. And again, thank you to Sarah and to Mike for offering this information today. And you will be receiving, if not today, then tomorrow, the follow-up to this email with some of the resources that we talked about. And if you want to stay in communication with us and get our newsletters with our events that we host and other opportunities that occur in the region, please contact us. Or if you want to partner with us, we would very much like that. And that's it. Hope you guys have a great day and thank you so much.